So I won't be shy later.
No. So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Atlantic Council. My name is David Korani. I'm the director of our Eurasian Energy Futures Initiative. It's my particular pleasure to welcome you all at today's book launch event. We are launching a book which was already launched once, so it's a relaunch or a second launch, let's put it that way, on the future of natural gas markets and geopolitics. And it's not an Atlantic Council publication, although we played a role in that, in as much as I wrote a chapter on US LNG exports within that book, but it was done by the Istituto Affari Internazionali, a Rome-based think tank represented by Nicolo here today, and the OCP Policy Center that is headquartered in Rabat, Morocco. And it was a very ambitious endeavor to provide in a relatively short period of time a very comprehensive tour on the history, the present, and the future of global gas markets. And I think the product which is here, and we have unfortunately only a few copies, but it's actually downloadable and it's online and it's completely free, it's accessible. So we are happy to send you around the link, and I think it was also in the original invite. It's quite a unique product in as much as it's a very rigorous analysis, but at the same time a very practical approach towards all the challenges that the global gas markets face. And it really takes a deep dive into the challenges as of today. I found particularly striking the introduction which you, Nicolo, with your colleagues wrote, essentially flagging that conundrum that we talk about natural gas all the time here in Washington, and ever since I got here 6 years ago, it has been in the headlines on the agenda all the time. But gas, if you think about it in a historic perspective, was not really one of the main fuels for most of the history. So it's a relatively recent phenomenon when it comes to historic proportions that gas became such a headline-grabbing item on the global energy agenda. For most of the time, it was an unwanted and difficult to exploit byproduct of the oil industry. And I think Evan can talk about that more in detail. I might call upon him later in the conversation. But then if you look at the changes in the past several decades, and particularly in the past decade, they are nothing short of revolutionary. So if someone 10 years ago, 15 years ago would have talked about US LNG being exported to Dubai and Kuwait, you would have probably told that crazy that he is or she is crazy. But we are witnessing the fundamental shifts in the global and regional gas markets, and that's exactly what the book is about. It also, I think, does an extremely good job at flagging the uncertainties going into the future. Uncertainties particularly around the gas being a transition fuel or a bridge fuel to a low-carbon economy, and that's what the first chapter already does at the beginning. And some of the uncertainties with regard to natural gas production potential, but also demand on the other side, and how it's going to shape in relation to other sectors globally. It has 11 chapters, 19 authors altogether. I think it's a very impressive cast of characters. Global energy trade and geopolitics, the US is a natural gas exporter, European energy security on the gas front, Russia obviously, Eastern Med, Western Med, Sub-Saharan Africa, Asia, Japan, the chapter that Jane authored. The one missing chapter, when I started thinking about this morning, was Iran, which I'm pretty sure will come up in the conversation nevertheless, but that's something that maybe the next iteration of the book could cover. So let's cut to the chase. We have three excellent panelists today to address the topic. Nicolo Sartori, to my immediate left, who is a senior fellow at the Istituto Affari Internazionali, and he's one of the main editors of the book, together with Silvia Colombo and Mohamed El Harak from the OCP Policy Center. Unfortunately, Silvia and Mohamed were not able to join us today because of other travel commitments, but they send their best regards. Nicolo will present the book and present the thinking behind the book and what they wanted to accomplish. Then Jane will talk about her chapter. Jane is a senior fellow, the Energy and National Security Program at CSIS. and then Bob Coot, who is a resident fellow with us here at the Atlantic Council, and the author of that major LNG paper that we published, the Atlantic Council, back in February. We'll talk about the U.S. angle in particular, and perhaps some other issues later in the conversation. We plan to have initial opening remarks, brief opening remarks, and then delve into the conversation right away, moderated conversation. I will have some follow-up questions, and I plan to open up the floor as soon as possible. We are on the record. We are live webcasting the event, and for those of you who tweet, the hashtag is, as usual, AC Energy. So without further ado, Nicolo, the floor is yours.
Thank you, David. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, everybody. First of all, let me express my gratitude to the Atlantic Council and to David in particular for making this event possible. I'm honored to be here presenting the book in front of just such a distinguished audience. The book, as David said, is an outcome of a common project launched by the Istituto Affari Internazionali and the OCP Policy Center in Rabat, and as David said, has been done in a very short time period. We launched the idea and the whole process last year in mid 2015, and we have been able to publish a very recent documents, also in terms of data, by just at the beginning of summer, presenting it in a conference in Rabat. This has been the result of a great effort done in collaboration with Silvia Colombo and Mohamed El Arak, as said, but we don't have to forget also to underline the invaluable contribution of the different and the excellent group of authors that contributed to it. Experts and scholars from all around, for think tanks all around the world, and I'd like to thank in particular David and Jane, who contributed and who are here with us discussing the book. But the key question is, why a book on natural gas in 2016, to publish a book in 2016? First of all, because today, what has been predicted by the International Energy Agency 5 years ago, in 2011, the golden age of gas has not yet materialized, even though there were some fundamentals and some factors that were extremely promising towards this path. The first one is, as David mentioned, is the potential key role of natural gas as a transition fuel due to its low greenhouse gas emissions compared to coal and oil, and also to its potential contribution as a backup fuel for renewables. And second, because of the growing supply emerging in that period, thanks to new or improved technologies both in the upstream and in the midstream sectors. However, these discrepancies, the discrepancies between the projection and the reality made us to encourage us to analyze what didn't work in that provisions. And the book tries to provide an overall picture of the development in the international gas markets, factoring in a set of political, economic, industrial, and technological variables that are currently affecting either positively or negatively the development, the consumption, and also the trade of natural gas resources at the global level. After the two initial thematic chapters on the role of gas as a transition fuel and on the emerging trading of LNG, the book adopts a more geographical approach, as said by David, in the attempt to cover the main developments in key supplier and consumers' country, providing a set of data about key geological features and resources potential, the evolution of consumption and production patterns, the development of pro-gas policies and regulatory frameworks, and finally the implementation of specific and particular import-export strategies by countries. But the book does not only want to provide a big picture and information and data on this market. It tries to go beyond this just numerical analysis and wants to offer some interesting food for thought also on the role of natural gas in international politics, and at the same time the influence of international politics in the development of natural gas and in the globalization of the gas markets. Much of the analysis made in the book, in fact, is based on the assumption that gas is perceived, rightly or not, as a politicized commodity, which can be easily used by producing country to exert or to project power towards the consumers. The situation contributes to create a sort of public discourse. The idea that the gas is not a secure source of supply, and that the increasing reliance on gas, particularly from one single source like Russia, for instance, for Eastern European countries, could endanger the energy security of states. This aspect, considered and analyzed in depth by Chapter 1, for instance, would contribute to explain the reluctance by both national and international decision makers to adopt resolved gas-oriented policies. Is this perception of uncertainty and insecurity right? Are the explanations, is this explanation sufficient to justify the missing development of the global gas market, or there are other factors that contribute to it? In this perspective, the book looks into factors that contribute to modify the situation, that could contribute to modify the situation of uncertainty, and the expansion of the global supply and the role of LNG, for instance, are certainly one of them. The evolution of the LNG sector, in particular, has a strong impact on different actors, and not only on the US, as mentioned before, or on Japan, which is the largest importer in the world, but also on Europe, for instance, which has recently developed its first EU LNG strategy, on China, which needs to rely on LNG in order to reduce its carbon footprint, but also in Africa, where LNG is at the basis of the creation of a regional market, as well as the implementation of export policies. But the book does not only look, as David said, to the opportunities, but also to the challenges and to the constraints. And, for instance, underlines the need to implement serious market reforms in producing countries, which could make a risk to fail to act as a potential contributor to the gas demand if they do not implement them successfully. This is the case for Russia, for instance, which has started a sort of liberalization of its unexpected liberalization of its internal market, liberalization which is not, of course, complete, but it sends some signals also from the Russian side, or the countries in North Africa, which have to struggle to find a balance between the heavy subsidized energy sector, the need to continue exporting hydrocarbons, and the necessity to adapt to a transformation of the energy domain. Finally, the lack of political will is also among the factors slowing down the emergence of key potential energy regions like East Med and South Africa, as we say in the book, where some inward-looking in domestic policies and the lack of cooperative processes in the region are contributing to slow down and obstacle the development of sound gas sectors in those regions. And to conclude, just let me say that these are only few of the flashes extracted from the dense content of the book, a book that, generally speaking, shows how the technological, industrial, and also the economic fundamentals for the establishment of a global energy gas market are almost there. But what we need is mainly a political will and a policy, a concrete policy action to transform this separate and differentiated national or regional market into a real global market, and to eventually inaugurate the golden age of gas that was predicted 5 years ago by the International Energy Agency. Thank you very much.
was an excellent summary of what the book is, and we will delve deeper into some of the chapters later on. But let me now turn to Jane to talk about Japan and Asia in general.
Sure, I'd be happy to. First off, thank you so much for having me, David, and my friends at the Atlantic Council. So my chapter examines various factors that led to Japan to really take another look at their LNG procurement strategies, but then also consider some of the geopolitical implications that are arising from the shifts in the LNG strategies. So the main focus is on how basically the post-Fukushima energy or electricity supply shortage concern has led to the high volume of imports, and then eventually basically led to the Japanese government to try much harder to seek cheaper LNG as opposed to secure supply that may come with a higher price tag. Since the 2011 Fukushima, the central focus has been to secure cheap supplies. And there are two strategic adjustments Tokyo consequently made. One is to diversify suppliers, mainly from Southeast Asian countries. Up until 2011, about 2/3 of Japan's LNG imports traveled through South China Seas. There's definitely a much more recent geopolitical dimension to the whole South China Seas concern, but as early as 2011, Tokyo thought that they want to diversify, and there are definitely all these great potential associated with Qatar having this supply that meant to go to the US, but then were available for the Japanese markets, et cetera. But the first adjustment was to diversify suppliers. And then the second one was to really seek much more flexible terms in LNG contracts. The three key elements that are part of that, the second portion, are the linkage from oil-based pricing and destination flexibility, and then the flexibility in durations. The traditional LNG contracts were multi-decade long. Pricing was based on oil. Pricing was oil linked, and then also there was rather strict, restrictions as to where the cargo could go. Mainly to really make sure that the suppliers get the return on the investments and et cetera. But the situation has turned to post-Fukushima that Tokyo thought that they wanted to have more flexibilities and cheaper LNG than somewhat more of a secure supply. And my chapter also looks at how this shale revolution, so-called shale revolution in the US could not have happened at the more opportune time for the Japanese, as US LNG export model is quite different from the traditional export models. And the chapter goes into details. I also looked at some of the domestic Japanese policy debates that may have impact on the future of, for natural gas, namely the challenges that Tokyo is having vis-a-vis the nuclear restarts. Also, the ongoing power sector and gas sector reforms or deregulation efforts. And thirdly, the challenge of balancing their climate commitment versus their greater reliance on non-nuclear fuels for their power supply. And lastly, the geopolitical one here looked at particularly Japan's relationship with Russia, China, as well as the US. And I think I took a deeper dive into how Tokyo, under the current administration, is really trying to use energy relationship with Russia to solve some of the non-energy issues, the historical and territorial concerns that Tokyo has had. Counting on the centrality of energy exports to Russian economy as something that can really move the situation forward in Tokyo's view. But then when it comes down to it, it's really the primacy of Tokyo's relationship with Washington under the formal security alliance that really basically constrains or really sets the parameter in which Tokyo can really act, not just in terms of the specific energy deals that they may pursue, but over not just the specifics, but in terms of supplier diversifications, i.e. Perhaps closer relationship with Russia. So that's it for now.
Thank you, Jane. But you spent your entire career at the agency on looking at the intersections of energy markets and geopolitics, and you witnessed firsthand the rise of gas as one of the central issues in global energy geopolitics. And you have also witnessed the rise of the U.S. as a major it's always been a major player, but a very different type of player in the last 5-6 years. So if you could, with the help of your own LNG paper and the LNG paper in this book, talk a bit about the role of the U.S. in global gas markets and to what extent the U.S. changes the whole global equation by starting to export.
Sure, it's a pleasure, especially to be able to analyze U.S. energy. By law, we didn't do that. We missed kind of a critical part of the global perspectives, as I'm now finding out. Well, as the only one up here who's not an author of this book, I can give a objective critique. And I have read the whole book, and it's very, very good. I strongly recommend it. The future of gas is bright. It's also a bit smoky. How bright the future will turn out, I think, depends on, as the previous speakers have mentioned, the degree to which governments embrace natural gas as a transition fuel to move us from a more heavily dependence on hydrocarbons to more friendly climate fuels. I don't think we've quite seen the momentum that some of us might have expected in this regard, but it is still early. Gas provides the most energy per unit of carbon emissions among the hydrocarbons, which makes it important. It's very versatile, but I think it's still a big question on whether it's going to fulfill this transition role to the extent that some of us think it can. Meanwhile, global gas and LNG production continues to rise, still driven to a large part by the U.S. shale gas revolution. Last year's production in the U.S. was another record, rising by 5%. We'll see another record this year, based on about 0.5% growth. And the EIA is predicting another 3% rise in 2017. The growth of LNG capacity continues at a furious pace in Australia and the United States. The U.S. is still on a pace to approach 100 billion cubic meters of annual capacity by 2020. Right now, 110 BCM has been approved and is under construction, and another 50 BCM is already approved by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. So the big wave is coming, not until about 2018 and 2019, but already in the past 7 months, Cheniere has exported more than 25 cargoes from Sabine Pass, including the first tanker load to China through the expanded Panama Canal from the lower 48 states. we have to be careful how we phrase that because, as you all know, the U.S. used to export LNG from the lower 48 states back in, starting in 1959. And the Kenai LNG export terminal from Alaska has been exporting to Asia beginning in 1969. The global LNG trade is still expanding, still connecting regional markets. It rose by 2.5% last year. The number of importing countries has risen to 35, now including Egypt, Jordan, Pakistan, and Poland, with Uruguay and Colombia also working on completing import terminals. Although spot sales are growing, last year a total of 24 new long-term contracts of 5 to 23 years were signed. I want to focus on one of the uncertainties in the book, which is the extent to which we might see competition between Russia and U.S. LNG in Asian and European markets. The European market has been much discussed, but I think we're going to see competition in Asia and in particularly China as well. The central question is whether Russia will try to keep U.S. LNG out of its markets by underpricing its gas. In Europe, U.S. shale gas actually has been depressing Russian prices since at least 2009 by diverting LNG destined for the U.S. To Europe because it turned out to be unneeded in the United States. Moscow reacted in 2009 by cutting its purchases of Turkmenistan's gas by 30 billion cubic meter, which kind of took care of offset the very first wave of LNG. But that card has now been played, and Russia needs some others. Currently, the low prices in Europe make it difficult for U.S. LNG because of, the reason is not Russian monopolistic practices now, but just market forces and competition. The good news is that Gazprom is showing responsiveness to market forces and competition. The not so good news is that it doesn't really have a choice at this time. At the same time, Gazprom is trying to press advantages through other means, including bilateral deals with Turkey for the Black Sea pipeline and with Germany for Nord Stream 2, and by keeping Central Asian gas out of Europe by raising political, legal, and military obstacles to a Trans-Caspian gas pipeline. By the numbers, the price of Russian gas at the German border has fallen from just over $5 per million BTU in January of this year to just below $4 in May, rebounding slightly to $4.25 in August. Not everyone in Europe gets to pay the price of Russian gas at the German border, however. Gazprom's Alexander Medvedev said Gazprom's average price in Europe this year would be between $4.70 and $4.85. This is still low enough to undercut U.S. LNG, even at the marginal cost. the competitiveness of U.S. LNG also has been hurt by the recent rise in the Henry Hub price of gas that it has to buy to liquefy, which has risen to $3 per million BTU recently from just under $2 at the beginning of this year. The short-term marginal costs of U.S. LNG to Europe would be around $5 per million BTU. And this would exclude about $3, which is the tolling costs that customers have paid, or the liquefaction costs that can be considered as a sunk cost. So the $5 would be a variable price. For Russia, $5 would also serve other purposes of making coal and renewables less competitive in Europe. So I think what we might be looking for is whether Russia tries to keep prices under $5 as those prices move up. And for those of you who like the price in billion cubic meters, it would be about 175, well, 1,000 cubic meters, $175. With all the moving parts, this, of course, gets cut into if Henry Hub prices continue to rise. Russia is sitting on about 100 billion cubic meters of annual surplus capacity now, and variable costs for Russian gas has been estimated at about $3.75 to $4. So maintaining a low price is doable. Now, whether it's economic for Russia to do is another consideration, because Russia sells about 165 BCM annually to Europe now, and they'd be losing revenues on that entire volume by discounting their price, and that would keep out a negligible amount of U.S. LNG for the next couple of years. It's not until the wave of LNG capacity comes online in the U.S. in 2018, 2019, that there's an appreciable volume for Russia to try to keep out. And by that time, there'll be a higher share of gas coming from the Yamal Peninsula, which is higher cost to Russia. And Russia also would be risking the stifling of its own LNG aspirations. Last year, Russian companies signed 8 new long-term sales and purchases contracts for LNG, 4 of them involving Gazprom, and indicating that Russia expects and wants to be a significant player in the LNG markets. Going back to those markets, Europe and Asia, much has been made of the low demand expectations for gas in Europe and the slowdown in Chinese gas growth. But in Europe, the export demand will be growing substantially because indigenous production in Europe is declining. So Europe is still going to be a market to target. And China, although its demand growth has slowed, is still the fastest growing in the world. Also, both of these markets are building new infrastructure that is going to help U.S. LNG exporters. in Europe, a few additional LNG import terminals in the east and southeast where they haven't been prevalent, and probably more important, interconnecting pipelines that can move the gas from the terminals, and especially the many terminals that exist on the west coast of Europe now, inward to other markets. China also is dramatically expanding its capacity to import LNG. This, together with the stated objectives of these regions to improve their gas diversity, the reliability of gas supply, and the security of gas supply, I think will make U.S. LNG a major factor in these and other markets.
Thank you, Bud. Excellent. Before we delve into the regional geopolitical questions that some of you already put on the table, let me just ask you about gas as a transition fuel, bridge fuel, and some of you already alluded to the uncertainties and the question marks and the challenges in your presentation. One particular challenge, which Jane also mentioned and you, Bud, mentioned as well, is the increasing competitiveness of renewables. And part of the reason why Chinese gas demand has been so depressed is that renewables are just so competitive, and they are getting more and more competitive. And the recent news in August that Abu Dhabi and Dubai commissioned new solar projects under $3 per kilowatt hour just points you towards a world where renewables are simply on grid parity without any subsidies whatsoever. So what are the implications for natural gas because of the plummeting cost of renewables? And then a related question to that, there has been a lot of talk about natural gas and renewables still could live in symbiosis, and in many ways the spread of renewables could actually help the demand for natural gas as well, because there is a synergy between the two, in as much as natural gas could provide baseload power and renewables are by definition intermittent. And there were a bunch of studies that actually refuted this argument and went up against and looked into case studies in various different countries in Europe and elsewhere and came up with findings that actually pointed to the contrary. So how do you see that? And that's a question for the whole panel. So if we can start with Jane and then Nicolo and Bob.
I think natural gas is really sort of caught between strong government support for renewables generally, whether in Europe or in Asia, and then still the economic competitiveness of coal. Especially in Asia, coal is still quite dominant. It's easy to store. It's fairly local. But when we look at this sort of a competition between renewables and natural gas, I think in major Asian economies, in this case, I guess, i.e. Japan and China, because I tend to focus on these two countries quite a bit on a day-to-day basis. But they're a bit different because in China's case, Chinese do have resources, right? So the Chinese national oil companies have quite a bit of reserves and et cetera. So, whether there's will and whether I think at the government level, the goal is to increase the share of natural gas to 10% by 2030. And I do think it's quite an ambitious goal because currently it's only about 6% of the share, and to raise it to 10%, I think the annual growth rate needs to be closer to 10. But it's still indigenous, and so I guess it could be a base load fuel. The gas could be a base load, particularly if they succeed in unlocking unconventional resources. But for Japan, which is highly import dependent, whether it's coal or gas or oil, base load in the Japanese context has been nuclear, and that's the reason why Abe administration is pushing for nuclear restarts. The more common argument, which view is more compatible with renewables, is really nuclear in Japan's sense. But having said that, I think the continued public concern over safety, the nuclear governance and the government's crisis management capacity has been pointing to sort of a continued viability of natural gas, even in Japan, and even though they realize that a natural gas is much more expensive than coal. But then when it comes to coal, I think there's a great sort of a pressure to address and also fulfill its international commitment. So, but I think coal, the coal still, in Japan is quite dominant. And certainly, when we look at India as well, that's, that is to remain as important part. But I think generally speaking, all these governments in Asia do not aspire to become to be known as major emitters of CO2. So there is, generally there is a goal, but then again, it's really, caught between the strong support for renewables versus cheap coal. That's still the basic picture there.
Mm-hmm. Niccolo?
Yeah, if we look at the European case, it's quite similar. In particular, if we consider Germany as the Asian example in Europe, because the strong investment through the Energiewende in Germany in the renewables did not materialize this expansion of the natural gas market and on the natural gas electricity generation, but then produced an increasing reliance on coal. Today's coal is about between 30 and 40% of the total electricity mix in Germany, while natural gas is only 9%. And this is due mainly to price reasons. Then there are other factors that contribute to explain at least some European countries' reliance on coal and preference to use coal rather than natural gas. Of course, the first one is legacy. There are these old coal-fired power plants which are there, and the construction of new one, more efficient gas-generated power plants would cost. And in a situation where the European economy is still struggling to recover, this cost can have an impact also on the economy itself. At the same time, there are some social aspects which are important. For instance, we look at the Poland case, where domestic production of coal is not because the Polish coal is cheaper than the international one, but because this production, this industry provides jobs and occupation to good parts of the Polish population, in particular in the southwestern part of the country. And also for this reason, sometimes the legacy on coal is difficult to abandon. And of course, as we say also as we say in the book itself, there is again this perception of natural gas as a insecure, geopolitically speaking, source of supply. In particular, for those countries that today rely 100% on natural gas coming from Russia, if you think of Bulgaria, for instance, and this, along with the other already mentioned before, create a sort of unfriendly environment for the full development of this combination, renewables and natural gas in Europe.
Sure. Sure. Go ahead.
Quickly, I'd get remiss if I didn't mention that the Chinese do have vision and targets to cap the coal consumption. But at the same time, I think the share of, but I think they will continue to be an important importer of coal from the global coal markets, and it's not going away anytime soon. But I think there is a strong commitment to reducing the reliance on coal and having other fuels come up. So it's not to say that they're just sort of hands off and let the whatever the cheapest fuel just run with the market or the energy mix share. So.
Yeah, I would agree that the competition is really between gas and coal rather than gas and renewables, although gas does provide a good base load fuel. One additional example is Saudi Arabia, who doesn't import gas for mostly security or independence reasons, but instead uses an abundance of oil for electric production and as an industrial fuel.
Let me ask you about LNG in particular. And part of the reason why the U.S. shale gas revolution, unconventional gas revolution, could have happened is the improvement of technology and huge efficiency gains that made gas production just a lot more competitive. And that's also the reason that we can talk about exports today, because the base price is just so low. You see a space in cost reduction also across the LNG value chain, so liquefaction, transport, and maybe regasification. Do you see potential gains? And that's a question to the other members of the panel as well.
Well, the U.S. starts off with an advantage by converting import terminals into export terminals. They already have the port facilities, the pipeline connections to the domestic resource, and storage facilities. This would give them an advantage against these, compared with these massive projects that are coming online in Australia. Australia counters with the transport advantage of serving the large Asian markets to some extent. For further reductions, I think we'd have to see that largely in transportation, which I think we will see with more efficient tankers, and just the depressing of prices in the low price market for gas. I think that's primarily it, together with probably more investment in gas production now that Henry Hub prices are coming back up. Shale gas production, though, has never been very expensive, in contrast to shale oil production. So there's still a big advantage in domestic production costs.
So if I may go back to Europe and, sorry, go ahead.
Can I just quickly add? I think Bud already talked about the transportation element, but I think the Panama Canal is a perfect example for the U.S., Gulf of Mexico, U.S. Gulf area export terminals, right? So it reduced the transportation costs by, shortening the days that cargoes have to travel. Although I guess there's caveat that it doesn't, there's that gain only up to about, I guess, Hong Kong, if I'm not mistaken, or Singapore area. So it's still, depending where in Asia, Suez may, still be viable. The other thing I wanted to quickly mention is this modular construction. I think there's still quite a bit of a debate that some people think this, modular construction of export terminals, brings about a lot of savings. But I think the others, there is enough of there are enough sort of concerns that it may not, that it will require a lot more complex assembly, expertise and etc. on site. You could build different parts in different factories, but you still have to build it. So, I think that's not a potential area. I think it depends on sort of climate and terrain specific, but that there's another way that you might see sort of a supply chain value, gain technology side.
If I may add just something, I'm not able to predict if there is still room for reducing pricing, but I think there are two elements that can be of interest for the future of moving gas, let's say. The one is the floating stations, which are growing up and which are becoming more and more used to deliver smaller amount of gas through the markets. And the other one is in particular for smaller regional markets with smaller distances between the point of gasification, liquefaction, compression, and delivery is exactly the compressed natural gas, which in markets, for instance, like the East Mediterranean, can be seen as a potential solution that would reduce costs. and make the transportation through mobile, not fixed infrastructure, let's say, more cost effective.
Mm-hmm. Focusing a little bit about Europe, you mentioned the European LNG strategy that I think came out earlier this year, and it's being now debated, which in my mind is in a stark contrast with projects like Nord Stream, or Nord Stream, the expansion of Nord Stream 2. So how do you see that European strategy? Is there a European strategy to tap into this unparalleled opportunity that US LNG and frankly the changing nature of global energy markets represent? Is there a coherent strategy, and how does it relate to projects like Nord Stream 2 in Europe?
Yeah, let's say that Nord Stream 2 is not part of the European strategy, not at all. In fact, the Energy Union was published, the Commission on the Energy Union published 1.5 years ago, clearly stated that any type of new rapprochement with Russia also in the energy sector would have to take place after a sort of resumption of also political relation between the parties. So there was no room for any project, any implementation of projects in between the EU and Russia. And in fact, one of the elements of this Nord Stream 2 initiative is in fact the fact that it has been somehow outside the European framework, and also in contrast to the European framework and to the European guidance, both in the EU LNG strategy, but more in general the strategic vision of the EU on the future of gas. This created a sort of harsh debate in Europe, also dividing some of pro-Russian states in terms of energy cooperation with the Kremlin. For instance, the Nord Stream 2 issue created a strong drift between the Italian vision that perceived itself as weakened vis-à-vis Russia, and more generally from the economic perspective, by the attempt of Germany, perceived attempt of Germany to acquire a sort of monopsony relation with Russian through Nord Stream 2, sorry, and also creating a strange alliance in Europe between the Central and Eastern European countries and Italy vis-à-vis this German position. But also the German approach towards Nord Stream 2 is not very clear, because the government itself is very divided on the future of the project, on the feasibility of the project, also in terms of political responsibility towards the European integration and towards European policy. And the party of Angela Merkel, for instance, has been very critical also in the parliament towards the project. Now the situation is very, let's say, undefined, because the pull-out of the European companies from the project earlier this August make the realization of the project more difficult itself, because the Gazprom initiatives risk to be seriously hit by the third energy package. So in this sense, the European strategy would not be able to possibly prevent the attempt of Russia and Germany to strike the deal. But then when we go to more competition application of the application of competition rules, then we'll probably have something that will make the project more difficult for the realization.
Can actually Nord Stream 2 lead to the liberalization of the Russian pipeline gas export market? Can that be an incentive for the Russians to sort of circumvent the whole third-party access issue? Can that be a push to finally, make it a more open market when it comes to gas pipeline exports?
You mean from the internal perspective, to allow
from
other?
Russian because Gazprom right now has a pipeline export monopoly.
Yeah.
So,
12.
I mean, if I were the Russians, I would argue that, well, if I open up my own gas market and if I liberalize gas pipeline exports, then Nord Stream 2 can be used by all
by
Russian
others,
players.
Yes, by other players.
So it's not just Gazprom, it's not just one party.
Yes, this would be certainly in line also with some movements inside the Russian gas markets and the liberations I was mentioning before. So yes, in any case, if Gazprom will be the sole owner of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, this will create in any case some let's say problems with the application of the third energy package.
Right. Let me ask this from Jane and Bod on the Asian front, but connected to Russia, of course. So partly because of the European issues, Russia has been looking at the Asian markets for quite a long time. They have been negotiating with the Chinese for more than a decade now, and there are some discussions with the Japanese as well in terms of Russian potential exports already happening on the front of LNG, and they are talking about potentially a pipeline, although a peace treaty would be useful before a pipeline goes there. But what are your prospects on Russia's ability, also in conjunction with the squeezed financial situation they are in, and Gazprom's ability to pull all these projects together, and whether they indeed have the financial ability to put these all together? And then the progress in particular on the Russia-China gas pipeline deals, both from the east and then potentially from the west.
Sure. Shall I? I think this lower oil price situation has sort of imposed discipline on some of these the stakeholders that are looking at multiple Russian LNG or the natural gas export projects, to say the least. But as far as the Asian markets go, the May 2014 agreement between Gazprom and CNPC of China to have East Siberia gas exports to China via pipeline. I mean, that to me was, to begin with, it was more of a geopolitically driven than commercially driven, in that President Putin, coming back from Shanghai, wanted to sort of show the world that, the U.S., let sort of the West couldn't really isolate Russia, that there are people that are still interested in what Russia could offer. And I guess subsequently there was also, MOU on the Western Siberia, West Siberia gas deal as well. We haven't seen as much progress. I think in part because Chinese appetite for natural gas is not as strong as it once was. But then also it's, and I think that is sort of reflected, sort of reading between lines of what some of the Russian leaders or business leaders are saying, that I think there's a bit of a frustration that, they're counting on China to really become a lot more of a sort of force in helping Russia continue its sort of lifestyle, if you will. But if the time is, energy market is pretty cyclical, and I think down the road, the momentum may get stronger again. And I do understand that the part of Siberia is under construction, but then exactly to what extent the Chinese may pressure Russia to speed up, it's really subject to their the current economic, not just the energy demand, but the economic situation. When it comes to Japan, I think Japan, there are multiple sort of project ideas, if you will, including the Vladivostok LNG export project, and there's also the pipeline project. For Tokyo, I mean, Russia is the only country that has the resource wealth that could also send the natural gas via pipeline. I mean, no other exporters can quite do that, right? So there's sort of added attractiveness, in this the potential pipeline gas trade with Russia. But generally speaking, I think given the uncertainty over natural gas demand going forward, really driven by the uncertainty over the nuclear restarts, and I guess the pace of their power sector and gas sector reforms, and how that may really affect these companies' balance sheets. I think there's as far as energy companies in Japan go, I think they're a lot more cautious about this pipeline trade proposal, because pipeline, obviously, unlike LNG, you can't easily shift the receiving side or the supplier side. So, but when it comes to, I think, LNG, I think the Japanese is still hoping that something may come out of that. Having said that, I think, with the Australian LNG, Australia becoming a major LNG exporter in the region, and of course the U.S. offering a range of flexible terms that no other supplier has been able to really offer, I think the appetite has been reduced a bit. But at the same time, I think there's always that little bit of rivalry that I think Tokyo feels vis-a-vis Beijing. So to the extent that the current geopolitical but then market conditions may be bringing Moscow and Beijing closer together, I think Tokyo still wants to be part of the sort of at the table or at the dining, sort of at the banquet, making sure that whatever happens between Russia and China would not really undermine Japan's energy diplomatic position in the region, as well as sort of overall geopolitical set of geopolitical interests vis-a-vis these countries.
Thank you, Jane. Bud?
Well, from Russia's perspective, they haven't been able to get the price that they want from the Chinese. And part of this May 2014 deal was that Chinese banks would help finance the development of some major fields in East Siberia that would be needed to provide the gas. And with the decline in demand and prices, that money hasn't been forthcoming.
We have about 20 minutes left, so let me open up the floor. Ambassador, please introduce yourself. Wait for the microphone to arrive, introduce yourself. There is a lot of expertise in the room, so otherwise I would just ask you to ask questions, but in this case, I would also encourage you to make comments. So, but please be brief.
Just questions. Rich Koslerich, George Mason University, thanks very much to the Atlantic Council and to the authors of this book. Two unrelated questions. Could you talk a little bit about Iran and whether they're going to be potentially in the next 5 years an actor in either Asia or Europe? And secondly, to what extent are the requirements coming out of Europe, particularly Germany, for a certain percentage of renewable power by a certain date affecting investment decisions in natural gas production of electricity? In other words, are the requirements for renewables coming in at a time that's shorter than the time it would take to pay back an investment in a new gas-powered electrical power project?
Who wants to take the first or the second or both? Jane?
Sure. As far as, I think my understanding of the Iranian situation is that they might be needing the gas to really sort of, if you will, revitalize their oil production. So I'm not so sure exactly how much gas they will have left. But these Asian consumer economies are greatly interested, especially Japanese, because China kept the involvement, for the past couple of years, but essentially Japanese gave up on its interest in the Azadegan field back in, I believe, mid of the last decade, over all these geopolitical issues and et cetera. And so I think there's great interest, but they are always also aware that it's the price needs to be right. The market condition and demand, there has to be stronger demand signal from Asia to begin with, combined with the actual availability of gas for exports from the Iranian side.
But?
Yeah, I would second that. I think Iran's priorities are reinjection of gas into oil fields, their feeding their petrochemical industry, which is a money maker, and satisfying general demand for the public. Exports would be fourth in that list.
And even if just add to that, even if they export, it might actually be electricity as opposed to natural gas in its raw form.
If we had talking with European companies trying to deal with Iran after the deal and the lifting of the sanctions, the impression is that the situation of the sanction is not still clear and it's very difficult to invest in the country today. So the perspective of 5 years today is not even to be taken into consideration. As far as I can understand from a business perspective. Iran was probably the key factor for the idea of the Southern Gas Corridor from the European Union back in 2003, because was the real country that could feed the Nabucco pipeline, which was expected to be 31 BCM. What I do think, in perspective, seeing in any case the possibility to invest in Iran for companies, that this European idea is very difficult to materialize anyway, even though Iran will get back to the international gas market and so on. Because if you look at the location of the gas fields, it's much more probable than Iran will be able to export its gas through LNG towards Asia in, let's say, Qatar-like way and strategy, rather than trying to build a 1,000 kilometers pipeline that will connect to a market that is more or less flat. Even though if we know that the European demand is going to decrease, so there will be still room for new imports, but the market will be flat for a while. And the second demand, honestly, I didn't understand your point. Sorry.
The point is, if the Europeans are imposing a percentage of renewables that must be generated by a date certain, and if that point is shorter than the payout period for a new investment in gas-fired electricity as a transition fuel, does that have an impact on what Bud was talking about of gas now competing with coal?
So the fact that the targets imposed by the EU are affecting us, slowing down the you mean the creation and the build-up of new gas-fired generation? I don't personally see a strong correlation between the two. I think that Europeans had to invest in order to reach the targets, and just they try to cover the rest of the, let's say, unstable demand of electricity with what was already in place, and that was mainly gas-fired plants for Germany, for instance. While in Italy there was already a strong component of gas-fired. Sorry, I wanted to say coal-fired plants for Germany. While, for instance, in Italy there was already a strong basis of gas-fired plants, which allowed to get this transition different from the German case.
And just to add to that, if I may, there is also the question of the ETS and the reform of the European Emission Trading Scheme. There's a lot of discussions around that in various capitals and in Brussels, obviously, and a lot of willingness to reform that, to raise the carbon price in the ETS system. And if that is successful, if they manage to revoke some of the quotas, if they manage to fast-track the reform, that will have a positive effect on gas demand going forward, and that will have a negative effect on coal. But it's anybody's guess at this point whether that will indeed happen. Additional questions from the audience? Comments? Ariel.
Ariel Cohen, the Atlantic Council. Quick answer to Ambassador's question on Iran. Iran is importing gas from Turkmenistan, so the no-brainer for the Iranians would be to extend the pipeline from the south to the north and substitute the Turkmen import with domestic production. That's one. Two, the Turkish pipeline, the existing Turkish pipeline, is not full, and the supply was intermittent at very high prices. If they're serious about attempting to export, they can start with that. Filling the pipeline, maybe extending it not just to Armenia, but also to Georgia. There was some talk about that. They could do other things. They were talking to the Ukrainians, although for the life of me, I do not see how they can export to Ukraine at this point. Beyond that, I think there's so much gas there. There's an imperative 10 years from now to build an LNG train, provided the prices are right, if the economics work. If the economics don't work, then no. So two questions for the panel. One is, my impression is from everything you said, we are sort of in this nirvana of low gas prices indefinitely. What are the scenarios that would start driving these prices up? And second question on renewables, in case you looked at available technologies, do you foresee any sudden technological development that may drive the prices of photovoltaic or wind precipitously down to the point where they're really competing or marginally competing, and there's, if you calculate the price of CO2 emission, they are really becoming competitive? Thank you.
Who wants to start?
I'm trying to remember the first one.
The low natural gas price.
Yeah.
Whether it's
So
the,
whether it will last, and
sure.
if
I
not,
think
we'll bring them up.
I think there is, I mean, there are several things, but I think one of the to me, the more obvious ones is, the lack of upstream investments, sort of if we all become sort of complacency, not necessarily to echo the key, one of the key messages from the most recent G7 energy summit, but if we all become complacent with this low, oil and gas price situation, and sort of fail to keep investing, and then that could, eventually lead to low natural gas, the gas prices to come back up. But at the same time, I think there may be a bit of competing force to even that sort of a scenario, in that, a lot of folks are trying to figure out the company, many, the funds and then companies under the pressure from stakeholders to divest away from, fossil fuels and et cetera. And I'm not sure how these, things will impact how sort of traditional energy companies may go forward with the pace of reinvesting into the upstreams. And that's, I think, sort of much bigger question, if you will. It's more also sort of societal question, but I think one of the obvious ones is the lack of needed reinvestment into upstreams. Certainly China coming back strongly for whatever reason, but that may also require some internal successful, I guess, liberalization of a state-owned enterprise sector, which may or may not be politically attractive for the current leadership. But I think those are some of the things that came to my mind right away.
And just to play devil's advocate,
sure.
The Chinese government pushing the nuclear so hard may be a damper on gas.
That, yes, but I think the electricity demand has been slowing down quite a bit. So to me, the whole push for nuclear, yes, I agree with. I think that does compete with the domestic demand, but I think as important as meeting the domestic electricity demand from nuclear, I think the Chinese interest is also in exporting them. It's really having the higher value exports through nuclear, and also something like high voltage transmission systems.
Yes, and I think that also this LNG glut will somehow end, and probably this also will contribute to raise somehow the prices of the gas. In the next, this is not maybe in 5 or even less here.
Bud, you want to add something?
Just to agree that we do see a demand response where there are free market forces, and unfortunately that happens to be mostly in North America, where we're seeing higher consumption rates of oil and gasoline and a rebound of natural gas prices.
Evan.
Thank you. Evan Fury, Statoil. There's an argument here in the US, particularly around the shale gas industry, which says that gas is only good as an alternative to coal and coal CO2 emissions if the system losses from methane are below 4%. And that is a common sort of environmental counterpoint to the gas as a bridging fuel. I'm interested, and I have no idea about the answer to this, but is that an extendable argument outside the US, or is it something that's particular to the shale gas industry? And have you seen any evidence in the course of writing this book that 4% system loss argument has a sort of more global application?
I'd say no for Japan, or I haven't really seen that argument in Chinese context either.
I don't either, and it's not in the part, probably in the first chapter, which is the one more or focusing on the role of gas as a substitute. Is I think is never mentioned, and I never heard about this kind of argument.
So just to extend the point, is there any reason why system losses across the sort of global system, for want of a better term, should be any smaller than they are within the US? Which is, this 4% is a number that's cited by various environmental NGOs, for example.
Right. It's a great question, Evan. I have to think about it some more before.
There is such a genuine lack of data from places like Nigeria, Russia, even Qatar, so we don't actually know. That's the problem.
Yeah.
My educated guess would be that those system losses are higher in Russia, certainly.
Yes,
but
certainly.
we don't have data.
And of course, but there are countries which are starting to consume now, or they have started to consume very later compared to others, where the energy sector and the energy system can be more up to date compared to the American ones, for instance. And this 4% loss can be probably reduced by new technologies and new systems. This argument is also applied when we talk about the renewables, the application of renewables into new markets like North Africa, for instance. That would be much easier than integrate them into a already mature market like the one that's currently is the European one. So probably new systems will be, or new build system will be able to have lower losses than old system like the American one, and probably also the European one, or those of higher producing countries like Russia or Nigeria, or those.
Finally, I can't resist the temptation to ask a U.S. election-related question. Do you expect the U.S. elections have a major influence on all these issues that we discussed, and particularly U.S. LNG export policy and U.S. gas production as such?
I think there's a great anxiety among, as far as LNG goes, among the companies in these consumer or the importer markets that have signed on to U.S. LNG. If a particular candidate prevails, then maybe there will be some sort of revocation rights, maybe exercise, etc. I tend to, my response in general has been that, there's separation of power. There'll be a lot of examinations and legal challenges and etc. So, don't lose sleep over this for now. But I think the issues like methane regulations, how that may impact the bottom lines of companies, if the energy prices, oil gas prices remain low for for a couple, for additional few years. I mean that's something that they should be aware of perhaps. I mean because and also there's still the environmental activism like we're of course now all about sort of the Dakota Access. It's no longer Keystone. It's sort of the attention has moved on, but there's still these forces that may slow down or that reduce the scope of shale gas and shale oil production going forward. So it's not just the elections, but there other forces in the U.S. that they should be aware of at least.
Well, I think Congress is working hard right now to lock in easier requirements for LNG exports before either candidate takes office. There are two bills moving through the Senate and the House to put a limit on the amount of time the Department of Energy has to deliberate approval of exports to countries that don't have free trade agreements with the U.S.
Nicolo, European perspective?
From a European perspective, let's say that there seems from Europe that one of the two candidates is getting a less belligerent posture towards Russia. And I don't know if this can potentially transform and translate into a less belligerent gas policy toward Russia on Europe. And so less competition possibly on the European field is just a question, possibly provocative, but
it's an interesting aspect.
Yeah.
Vladimir Putin versus Harold Ham battle in Putin's circle. On that note, we ran out of time, unfortunately, but we only managed to scratch the surface. We haven't had a chance to talk about Africa, for example, the Eastern Mediterranean, gas and CCS, which I think is a very important topic, the role of gas in transportation. So there is so much more, and many of these issues are actually covered in the book. So I again strongly recommend to all of you to read it. It's available freely online, so you can download it. We're happy to send you or resend you the link. Let me just thank our excellent panelists today. Thank you, Nicolo, first of all, for editing this excellent book, and your colleagues, and for coming out to Washington to introduce it all the way from Rome, from Italy. Thank you, Jane, for coming over from CSIS, which is an easier commute, and then Bud from coming up from the 10th floor here at the council, and thanks for the excellent questions and comments from the audience.